Effective reading comprehension requires us to identify and determine relationships between the thoughts and ideas expressed in written communication. However, we cannot understand these relationships if we do not understand the meanings of the words that are being used. So, we must begin with a solid foundation of vocabulary comprehension upon which to adequately build effective reading comprehension strategies. It is not uncommon for an author to use analogies to help us make those connections between more complex thoughts or ideas and concepts that are already familiar to us. Therefore, it is important to understand what analogies are and how they are used so that we can identify them more easily and know how to use them to strengthen our overall comprehension of what we read. In this lesson, we will lay a foundation for making connections by unpacking simple analogies and examining the most common types of relationships that they employ. As always, we need to begin by defining terms. So, we're going to answer the question, what is an analogy? Analogies describe the relationships between words. So the reason that an author will do this is to explain a concept or thought or idea, not just simply show it. An analogy is going to show how two things are alike, but the real purpose is to make a point about the comparison. Typically, an analogy is going to contain two pairs of words that will show the similarities and relationships between each pair. And we will be looking at several examples when we get into the types of analogies that authors will use. So why is it so important to know what analogies are and how they are used? Well, it's going to help us develop key critical thinking skills to make us better readers. It helps us to more fully understand and comprehend the things that we read. Now that we know what analogies are, let's look at an example to help us figure out how they actually work. In this example, we are told a mechanic is to garage as a chef is to kitchen. Now remember, an analogy is two pair of words that share a relationship. So let's see if we can first identify our pairs and then use those pairs to see if we can determine the relationship that they share. So our first pair of words is mechanic and garage. The second pair of words is chef and kitchen. So what is the relationship between mechanic and garage? Okay, so we know that a mechanic is an individual and mechanic describes the work that the individual does. So it's an individual worker. So what's the relationship between mechanic and garage? Well, where does a mechanic typically work? That's right, works in a garage. So garage is the place of work. Now, what's the relationship between chef and kitchen? Same thing. Individual worker and kitchen is the place So our overall relationship between the two is going to be worker and place of work. Simple analogy, simple relationship that's easy to identify when we think of how the pairs of words are related. Now, before we move on to the types of analogies, there is a shorthand way that analogies will be written. So, a mechanic is to garage as a chef is to kitchen can be written like this. Mechanic, colon, garage, double colon, chef, colon, kitchen. So when we read this, we are still reading the sentence as above. A mechanic is to garage as chef is to kitchen. So a colon, a single colon, is used to replace is to. The double colon is used to replace as. So in a testing environment, you may see analogies written like this. You will see analogies written like this in your practice on IXL. So I just wanted to show you this to make you aware of what these statements actually mean. So when we read it, mechanic is to garage as chef is to kitchen. For the next few moments, let's examine some of the most common types of analogies that we may encounter. First, let's talk about the synonymous relationship. Synonymous may sound a bit familiar because we looked at synonyms in an earlier lesson. And as you recall, synonyms are words that share the same or even similar meanings. Well, a synonymous relationship is established when two words that convey the same meaning or even a similar meaning. For example, thrilled is to joy as angry is to mad. So thrilled and joy is my first word pair, and they share a similar meaning. My second word pair, angry and mad, also share similar meanings. So the relationship between the two is that the pairs share similar meanings within each pair. Now, an antonymous relationship, antonymous, antonym, opposite meaning. Antonymous relationship is established between two words that convey the opposite meaning. For example, we could say big is to small as tall is to short. So my first pair, big and small, mean the opposite. My second pair, tall and short, mean the opposite. So each pair shares the relationship of oppositeness. The next common analogy is the worker and tool relationship. And this relationship occurs when one word of the pair represents the worker and the other word represents a tool that he or she uses. An example of the worker and tool relationship would be carpenter is to hammer as mason is to trowel. So here we see two pairs of words that represent the worker and the tool that particular worker uses. The worker and working place relationship is also a common type of analogy. And this occurs when one word of the pair represents the worker and the other word represents his or her place of work. We already saw an example of that in our lesson to introduce analogies, so let's take a look at another example. Scientist is to laboratory, or laboratory if I have any Dexter's Lab fans watching this today. So scientist is to laboratory as lawyer is to courtroom. So a scientist typically works in a lab or a laboratory. A lawyer typically works in a courtroom. Now let's take a look at the part and whole relationship. And this occurs when one word of the pair represents a single part of the whole object given in the other word of the pair. So an example of the part and whole relationship could be eraser is to pencil as bristle is to paintbrush. So the eraser is a part of the whole pencil, just as a bristle is part of a whole paintbrush. Our next analogy is the animal or object and sound relationship. And this occurs when one word of the pair represents a sound produced by the object or the animal that is given in the other word of the pair. For example, meow is to cat as bark is to dog. So meow, of course, is the sound a cat makes, and bark is the sound that a dog makes. So that's the animal and sound, or object and sound relationship. Our next analogy is the purpose relationship. And the purpose relationship occurs when one word represents the purpose of the pair. So in this case, eye is to see as ear is to hear. So the purpose of the eye is to see. The purpose of the ear is to hear. The cause and effect relationship, we should already be familiar with that. We examined cause and effect relationships when we went through our module on text structures, and there's a full lesson on that. But in the case of an analogy, the cause and effect relationship occurs when one word of the pair tells the cause and the other tells the effect. So in this case, an example of a cause and effect relationship would be hungry is to eat as tired is to sleep. So eating is the effect of our cause of being hungry, and sleeping is the effect of our cause of being tired. The place relationship occurs when one word of the pair tells the location of a certain place. For example, Nashville is to Tennessee as Savannah is to Georgia. So Nashville is a place located in the state of Tennessee. Savannah is a place located in the state of Georgia. And then finally, the individual and group relationship. And this occurs when one word is the collective group of individuals within the pair. Good example of this would be musician is to band as soldier is to army. So a band is a collective group that is made up of individual musicians, just as an army is a collective group that is made up of individual soldiers. Let's take a moment and go to iExcel and see if we can work through some examples of analogies. And while we work through these different questions, let's see if we can identify the type of relationship that is being employed. In our first example, we are told tiredness is to sleep as curiosity is to either exploration or student. So to help us determine the correct answer, we need to think about what's the relationship? What analogy are we using? So tiredness and sleep appears to be a cause and effect relationship. So tiredness is the cause and sleep is the effect. So I'm going to abbreviate C and E to represent cause and effect. Now, with that in mind, what is the effect of curiosity? Is it exploration or is it student? Well, if we think of what these words mean, when we're curious about something, what do? We start looking for answers. We try to identify things. We try to research things. Well, another word for that would be exploration. So in this case, curiosity is the cause, exploration is the effect. In our next example, we are given the analogy, cake is to dessert, as throne is to either chair or bed. Let's begin by looking at the relationship between cake and dessert. So cake is a type of dessert. So we see that relationship. Cake is a type of dessert. Throne is a type of what? Is it a type of chair or a type of bed? Well, in this case, a throne is a type of chair. All right, now we have fisherman is to hook as gardener is to spring or shovel. Let's think relationship of fisherman to hook. So this is the worker and tool relationship. A hook is a tool that a fisherman uses to help catch fish. What tool does a gardener use? Does a gardener use a spring or a shovel? Well, typically a gardener would use a shovel. Therefore, shovel will complete this analogy. In this example, we are told chess is to gain as joy is to emotion or sadness. Well, once again, we have an example that's dealing with types. So chess is a type of gain. Joy is a type of what? What is joy? Well, joy is a feeling that we get, an emotion. So joy is a type of emotion. Let's take a look at a couple of examples that are going to be a little bit more challenging for us. Let's see if we can complete this analogy. Engineering is to profession as yacht is to ocean, vessel, or navy. So let's think about the relationship between engineering and profession. So engineering is actually a type of profession. It would kind of fall into the part and whole, or maybe even somewhat of a version of the individual collective group. So if we consider profession as a collective group, engineering, of course, would be a part of that. So an engineer is someone who does the job of engineering. That is a profession that an engineer possesses. Now, if we think in terms of, still thinking in terms of types, a yacht is a type of what? Is it a type of ocean? Is it a type of vessel? Or is it a type of navy? Well, in this case, a yacht is a ship or a vessel that sails on the ocean. Therefore, yacht is a vessel. So engineering is to profession as yacht is to vessel. In our last example, we have resistance is to opposition as advantage is to what? Weakness, benefit, or improvement. Well, let's think about the relationship between resistance and opposition. So when we resist something, that means that we don't want to do it. So if things are changing, for example, we can show resistance to that change. We don't want to make the change. Sounds an awful lot like opposition. You know, why do we not do something? Because we're opposed to it. So resistance and opposition both share a synonymous relationship. So what about advantage? Which word would be a synonym of advantage? Well, if somebody has an advantage, is that a weakness? No, of course not. So we can rule that out. So it leaves us with benefit and improvement. If somebody has an advantage, is that an improvement? Not necessarily, but I would argue that it's beneficial for that person. So in this case, advantage would be synonymous with benefit. So resistance is to opposition as advantage is to benefit.